When everything seemed to be falling apart, I discovered the power of starting over, my journey of overcoming and transformation. My name is Theodoro, I'm 32 years old, and I'm a lawyer. When all this happened, I was experiencing a period of apparent stability. I was working at a good firm, had just been promoted to senior associate, and felt like my personal life was finally coming together. I'd been dating Sophia for 4 years, and last year we decided to move in together. On paper, it seemed like a successful life, a growing career, a solid relationship, and living in a nice apartment. I thought I was doing everything right, building a foundation for the future. But in practice, I was far more exhausted than fulfilled, and I still didn't quite understand why. The first cracks began subtly. Small, unplanned expenses, social commitments I didn't remember accepting, credit card charges I barely recognized, but they were always accompanied by smiles, excuses, and Sophia's sweet way of convincing me that it was for the two of us. I ignored them, thinking it was just a phase, or perhaps her way of trying to insert us into a better social circle. But I didn't realize that my energy was fading, my bank account was dwindling out of control, and worse, my identity was becoming an accessory in the narrative she was creating for the world. Over time, it became routine. Sophia began referring to us as the couple of the moment, as if I were part of a personal marketing campaign. Social events became weekly obligations, always financed by me. She joined charity committees and expensive clubs, rented a luxury car without asking, and began acting as if she were the wife of a millionaire business partner. When I was barely paying my bills, I began to feel a constant tightness in my chest, a feeling of living to maintain an image that wasn't mine. But whenever I questioned her, she would counter with that old line, "My life, my rules. Don't you like it? The door's over." There. For a long time, I gave in, because honestly, I was afraid. Afraid of breaking up and feeling like a failure, afraid of scandal, afraid of seeming ungrateful after all her effort to make us a recognized couple. I clung to the idea that it was just a phase, that Sophia would soon realize she was overreacting and regain her balance. But with each passing month, I felt my identity blurring. I could no longer choose where to go, who to talk to, or how to spend my money. My name was used, without my consent, for business deals, meetings, even to obtain benefits at clubs. I was a puppet financing a fantasy that drained me completely. The trigger came on a random Tuesday, when I received a call from the bank alerting me to a business loan application in my name. Sophia had tried to add me as a partner on a business account without telling me. At that moment, it was as if all sails dropped. I saw clearly what was happening. It wasn't love, it wasn't a partnership, it was emotional. Abuse, financial manipulation, and the destruction of my reputation. For the first time in years, I didn't remain silent. I took a deep breath, locked my accounts, blocked my cards, and for the first time, heard the voice I'd been ignoring for so long. It was time to save myself. That night, I left the house without looking back. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I grabbed my laptop, some clothes, and went straight to a hotel. At first, it felt unreal, like I was running, away from my own life. But I needed space to breathe, to collect my thoughts, away from the constant pressure of maintaining an appearance that wasn't mine. In the hotel room, I sat down at the computer and began to write down everything Sophia had done in the past few months. The excessive spending, the club and committee registrations using my name, the social gatherings where she lied about our status. The more I wrote, the heavier I felt, but also the more determined I was not to return to that emotional prison. The next day, I began taking practical action. I called the banks and blocked all my accounts and cards that Sophia had access to. Then I contacted the country club to cancel any memberships linked to me. And that's when I received my first real shock. Sophia had introduced herself as Mrs. Theodoro, lying that we were married to gain access to exclusive benefits. The feeling of anger was accompanied by a strange sense of relief. For the first time I saw, without a doubt, that I was merely an instrument in her plan to build a life based on status. From that moment on, I knew I was on the right track in severing all ties with her. Sophia's reactions were immediate. My phone was ringing off the hook. She sent me desperate messages, trying to downplay what she'd done. She even showed up at the hotel, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that I was exaggerating. But I'd already understood that this was the cycle: manipulation, spending, lying, apologies, and starting over. Not this time. When she saw I was standing firm, she went on the attack on social media, posting indirect messages, trying to paint the image of a strong woman being persecuted. But her mask began to slip. Mutual friends began to see through the lies, and messages began arriving, confirming what I'd already suspected. She'd used my name to make promises that were never mine. Things spiraled out of control when I discovered she had even tried to scam my co-workers, offering bogus legal services in my name. I knew I needed to be firm. I made a public post clarifying everything, explaining that my achievements were the result of my own efforts and that anyone claiming partnership or commitment to me was lying. It was a turning point. The reaction was immediate. Many colleagues and professional contacts thanked me for the transparency and began reporting instances in which Sophia had tried to take advantage. Contrary to my fears, that exposure didn't tarnish my image. On the contrary, it liberated me. Over time, I uncovered more dirt she'd hidden. Sophia had made commitments on my behalf to organizations, fundraisers, and even attempted to secure a fraudulent business loan. Everything fell apart for her within days. I, who had felt chained, began to feel something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. I could finally live without having to support a theater, and that was the beginning of my true journey of overcoming. It wasn't easy to see the damage they'd done to my life, but it was also a relief to realize how much stronger I was without that constant burden. For the first time, I felt like I owned my own story. In the following months, a lot changed. The rebuilding wasn't instantaneous, and each small step was hard-won. I began to be more careful with my finances, the people around me, and most importantly, the stories I was telling myself about my life. I became more selective, more aware of who deserved my time and energy. More than anything, I learned to no longer submit to other people's expectations. I remembered who I was before Sophia, what made me happy, what I truly wanted for my future. The biggest challenge, however, was rebuilding my trust, not just in the people around me, but also in myself. How could I have been so blind as to ignore so many red flags? How had I let someone take so much control of my life? I didn't have easy answers to these questions, but self-criticism helped me understand myself in a way I never had before. And little by little, I began to forgive myself. I was human. I had failed at something that seemed perfect, but I was learning to pick myself up and not repeat the same mistakes. I returned to work with greater focus and determination. My superiors noticed the change in my attitude, and over time, I received new projects that challenged me to step outside my comfort zone. I was rediscovering myself, no longer as Sophia's boyfriend or the lawyer who helped build someone else's life, but as a professional capable of creating my own path. I realized that by freeing myself from Sophia's shadow, I had made room for greater things, like personal growth and true happiness. It's funny how things connect. When you finally break free from a toxic relationship, the rest of your life seems to take on a new perspective. I began to have more clarity about who I wanted to be, not only at work, but also in my relationships. What had once felt like a frightening loneliness was now a space of possibilities. I knew I would never again allow anyone to invade my life like that. Now, any relationship I built would have to be based on respect, trust, and above all, freedom. A few months later, I started dating Patricia, a pediatrician I met at a work event. She was a simple, straightforward woman without the need to play games or create a false image. When I offered to pay the bill, she said, "Let's split it. What's fair is fair." A conversation about a work event turned into a genuine exchange of ideas and values. The feeling of being with someone who valued my time as much as hers was revolutionary. I was finally experiencing what it meant to be in a balanced relationship, where the decision-making power was no longer concentrated in one person. The transformation was gradual. Each new experience, each person who entered my life after Sophia, helped me better understand the importance of self-care. I learned to appreciate the little moments, the ones I'd previously neglected. A simple conversation, a coffee, a meeting without external pressure. I rediscovered my appreciation for simple things like taking a leisurely walk or sitting alone with a good book. I was creating a new space for myself, without the expectations of being perfect or pleasing others. It was about being, just being. The biggest lesson, however, was realizing that overcoming wasn't just about doing the right things from now on, but about accepting that pain and mistakes are part of the journey. When everything fell apart, I felt lost, but at the same time I realized that suffering, that loss, made me stronger. Pain is inevitable, but how we deal with it is what truly defines who we are. I was no longer the person who hid behind a mask or who sacrificed myself in the name of something that wasn't real. I was someone who finally understood the importance of being authentic. Sophia, for her part, saw her life fall apart. She tried many times to reach out, apologize, and justify herself. But the lies she had told could not be erased, and I was no longer willing to be part of her act. Each message, each attempt at reconciliation only reaffirmed to me that I was on the right path. The pain of leaving behind what seemed like the best relationship of my life was replaced by a sense of freedom. The freedom to choose what was best for me, without relying on the actions or validation of another person. Ultimately, what happened was that I was forced to face my own insecurities. I was challenged to look within and understand what made me accept so much manipulation. Overcoming it wasn't about her or the end of the relationship. It was about understanding what I truly needed to feel complete and at peace. That's when I realized I didn't need anyone to validate me, and that in fact I already had everything I needed to be happy, the ability to start over. Today, I can look back without regret. I learned a lot from this experience, and above all, I learned to be true to myself. Life became lighter, more authentic. I'm not saying everything got easier or that the scars disappeared. Some things will always be with me, but they no longer define me. Every day, I feel stronger, more aware of my worth, and more determined to follow my own path. My story wasn't that of a superhero, but rather the story of someone who, despite everything, chose to be free. And this freedom, as simple as it may seem, was the greatest victory of my life. A time later, I decided to travel. I needed a place to reflect, away from the routine and pressures of the city. I went to a small village where I knew no one. It was a unique experience. There, I was able to reconnect with simple things, with nature, with silence. Every walk on the beach, every meal shared with strangers, made me realize how far I had distanced myself over the years. I was no longer the Theodoro who always worried about other people's opinions, about the image he projected. I was simply someone who wanted to find peace. During my stay, I met people from different places and backgrounds. Some were there to escape something, others to rediscover themselves, just like me. It was in this environment that, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I didn't need to hide anything. There were no expectations, no pressure to be someone I wasn't. I could be vulnerable without fear of judgment. These simple yet profound conversations made me realize how much we are all, in some way, searching for the same thing, to be accepted for who we truly are. I returned from my trip feeling renewed. Those weeks away helped me put my life into perspective. What felt like an end was actually the beginning of something new. I no longer wanted to carry the baggage of the past. I wanted to look to the future with optimism, even knowing it wouldn't be perfect. I was ready for new challenges, to truly start over. The pain of the past was still there, but now it was part of my story, no longer an obstacle. I began dedicating myself to projects that truly interested me. I went back to studying, seeking new knowledge, something I'd neglected while absorbed in my toxic relationship. Life began to have more color. The little things like a good book or a coffee with a friend became more valuable to me. I realized that happiness wasn't found in grand achievements or external impressions, but in the simple things, in authentic relationships, and in the peace that came from within. Today, looking back, I see how much my life has changed. Overcoming this didn't happen overnight. It was a long, difficult, and sometimes painful process, but at the same time, it was liberating. I learned that when we allow ourselves to be who we truly are, things begin to flow differently. It doesn't matter what others think. What matters is what we think of ourselves, and most importantly, what we do to become the best version of ourselves. I'm grateful for everything I've experienced, because it all brought me here. And now I'm ready for what comes next, confident that I can overcome any challenge because, above all, I know who I am.